I've seen people claim that a God Emperor of Dune adaptation simply isn't possible or wouldn't be good. I disagree and would like to go over how likely it is we could ever see the adaptation and why I think it would actually make an enjoyable film. For those of you unfamiliar or new to the Dune series, God Emperor of Dune is the fourth book in Frank Herbert's Dune Saga. Before I get any further, it should be noted that I will be spoiling segments of the book and referencing events that happened in the first trilogy. God Emperor of Dune is perhaps the most controversial of the Dune books. A lot of people say that once they got to God Emperor, they stopped the series. It's a book that separates the men from the metamorphosed sandworm gods. More on that later. For those of you who have only seen the new movies, I'm going to give you a short synopsis of the God Emperor of Dune and the major events leading up to it. Paul Atreides has twins with Chani at the end of the second book, Dune Messiah, which is the next book to be adapted in Denis Villeneuve's trilogy of movies. This movie, which I'll just call Dune 3, has recently been greenlit. In the third book, Children of Dune, the twins, Leto II and Ghanima, are 10 years old and preborn, similar to Aaliyah, Paul's sister, who Lady Jessica is still pregnant with at the end of Dune Part 2. In short, being preborn means that the children were exposed to large doses of spice during pregnancy, causing them to be awakened to their ancestral memories. These past lives the twins have access to causes them to behave way beyond their years. At the end of the book, Leto II uses sand trout and his prescience to begin the metamorphosis into a sandworm. He does this in order to save humanity from eventual extinction by following the Golden Path, which is a path that will prevent stagnation in humanity, incentivizing them to expand beyond the known universe, as well as implementing the ability into human genetics to hide from prescience. It is also revealed that Paul abandoned this path, unable to bring himself to do what was necessary. Leto II ends up marrying his sister, Ghanima, in a completely platonic relationship, and he becomes the ruler of the known universe. So, in God Emperor of Dune, 3,500 years have passed, and Leto II is still the ruler, known as the God Emperor. His metamorphosis has extended his life to that of a sandworm, which he will eventually fully become. Currently, he is more sandworm than man.
Idaho swept his gaze along the faceted, silvery grey body, noted the beginnings of a sandworm's ribbed sections, the sinuous flexings, the small protuberances that had once been feet and legs, one of them somewhat shorter than the other. He brought his attention back to the well-defined arms and hands, and finally lifted his attention to the cowled face, with its pink skin almost lost in the immensity, a ridiculous extrusion on such a body.
So in order for an adaptation to come to fruition, a few things would need to happen. First, Dune 3 would need to perform at least as good as Dune Part 2. Ideally though, it would perform better than its predecessor to show that the franchise has potential for expansion. Denis Villeneuve has stated that right now he intends to stop after Dune 3, calling it the end of his trilogy. Obviously, things could change, and he may be open to continuing the franchise, and if not, hopefully he stays faithful enough to the books to leave the option open for Legendary, who owns the rights, to continue without him. Assuming Children of Dune gets an adaptation, it would also need to be profitable. This might be a tall order since adapting Dune Messiah and Children of Dune will be much more difficult to adapt while appealing to the mainstream audience. I also think that with Denis excluding Aaliyah from Dune Part 2, where she should have killed the Baron, will make the Baron's possession arc in a Children of Dune adaptation less meaningful. I think regardless of Denis' intentions, his inability to include the broader Dune factions and some of his other changes will have repercussions later down the line for future movie adaptations. There's still some time for him to course correct in Dune 3, but if he continues omitting and changing things, it will be more difficult for the next person who takes over to remain faithful to the source material while maintaining a connection to Denis' trilogy. There's also the possibility that God Emperor of Dune could instead be adapted into a miniseries on HBO Max, since it's so far removed from the first few books, taking place 3,500 years past Children of Dune. Alright, so assuming the stars align and all the things come to pass that allow God Emperor of Dune to be made, I'm going to make an argument for why the adaptation could be successful. The reason I believe most people find God Emperor of Dune weird is because of the premise of a giant hybrid sandworm ruling the known universe with an all-female army referred to as fish speakers is a bit of an odd premise. First off, nothing is too weird for cinema as long as it's executed well. Legendary themselves released Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire earlier this year to astounding success, in which a giant lizard and ape team up to stop a different giant lizard and ape from wreaking havoc on Earth. So while you have to get people on board with the concept, I think the book itself is actually paced really well for a movie adaptation. The characters are all compelling with a ton of layered mystery surrounding them. Prominently featuring the plans within plans level of character motives Frank Herbert is so good at. Plus, God Emperor is the beginning of Frank Herbert introducing more on-screen action into his books. Leto II is the most compelling villain-esque character I have ever read or seen, for he's not really a villain. I mean, sure, he throttles humanity for thousands of years, but it's all in order to prevent humanity's eventual extinction. If you are able to adapt his motivations and philosophical musings to the big screen properly, he has the potential to garner sympathy and fear from the audience. Granted, the entire movie hinges on his performance and look. Obviously, his musings would have to be drastically cut down in order to save time. I think you could show both sides of him. The worm rampancy side of him can act as a sort of horror movie, balanced out with the more philosophical Leto II. As long as you can get the basics of his motivation across and the idea of the golden path, I think the audience can relate. The obvious choice for casting Leto II would be James McAvoy. This is the actor who played the younger Leto II in the sci-fi TV adaptation Children of Dune. He is a great actor, and this would be a nice fan service Easter egg for those of us who have watched it. Plus, his portrayal of Leto II is already well liked, and he's older now, which works perfectly for this God Emperor who is at the end of his reign. I think framing the movie from the eyes of Siona and Duncan would benefit the movie with plenty of revelations. The book tends to give you the answers early, whereas the movie can hide them for plot twists. A lot of the scenes in the book are begging to be adapted to the big screen and are some of the most iconic in the whole franchise. If you cold open the movie with Duncan Idaho approaching the God Emperor, and then as the conversation progresses we see the twist of Duncan pulling out a hidden laser gun to try to assassinate the God Emperor and failing, makes for an intriguing beginning to the film, followed by the title God Emperor of Dune. Then the next time we see Duncan Idaho is him being shipped in from Talax. They could even give us a tease of the grotesque axolotl tank birthing process, possibly even interspersed within one of those fancy title sequences. A lot of the exposition of the time period and changes on Arrakis, as well as the known universe as a whole, would be gained from Leto II and Maneo's conversations. The new Duncan Idaho would sort of act as a surrogate for the audience, because as he is learning this new world, we are also learning it with him. Siona's introduction in the book is an equally intriguing scene to be adapted, with her stealing the God Emperor's journals and running away from the massive guardian wolves, narrowly escaping with her life. All of her companions who go with her dying and sacrificing themselves for her cause.
The pack sounds took on a terrible commotion of frenzied yelps, but nothing more from Kuteg. She knew then how Kuteg was spending the last energies of his life, delaying them to help me escape.
You could also do a lot of interesting plot revelations, with Nayla being a fanatical servant of the God Emperor, but having to serve Siona on her quest to overthrow him. Also revealing all the other connections, such as Leto II allowing Siona to rebel in her youth, and Maneo being her father, but also the son of a Duncan Idaho Gula, and that Leto II wants this newest Duncan Idaho to breed with Siona. As well as the plot from the Ixians involving Wee Nori, who is bred to be an attractive trap for the God Emperor, mirroring that concept from King Kong that it was beauty that killed the beast. On top of the added drama thrown into the mix by the latest Gula of Duncan Idaho, who also falls for Wee Nori.
With growing excitement, Leto realized a betrayal of Ixian machinations in the new ambassador. They were well along in their own program to breed selected types for specific functions. Nori's functions was distressingly obvious to charm the God Emperor, to find a chink in his armor.
I will say that if we actually get to this point and continue with Jason Momoa reprising his role as Duncan Idaho, he will likely be in his 50s, so unless they can do some de-aging, he might feel a bit too old for the role. So while I'm not against keeping him, recasting him might be the better option. There is a bit of dark humor in this concept of the God Emperor using and disposing of his Duncans through multiple millennia, and I hope that they are able to get the tone of this correct. That's something that I feel was off with Dune Part 2, is that the tone, it felt too modern and less science fiction. And I think this entry in particular needs to lean away from this modern and political insertion and just focus on being science fiction. When I go to a movie, I want it to feel like escapism. I don't want to sit there wondering about the motivations behind the changes they make. Returning to the sands of Arrakis for Siona's testing with the God Emperor is also a scene I would love to see adapted.
He felt her life ebbing. Fight the darkness, Siona. That was one thing the Atreides did. They fought for life, and now she was fighting for lives other than her own. He felt her dimming though, the terrible outflow of vitality. She went deeper and deeper into the darkness, far deeper than any other had ever gone. He began to rock her gently, a cradle movement of his front segment.
The end of God Emperor, which sets the groundwork for what would have been a second complete trilogy had Frank Herbert not passed away, is going to be even more difficult to adapt, for it explores the Bene Gesserit sisterhood, diving into how they actually act and what they work toward. And perhaps I'm being too pessimistic, but I don't think Hollywood will want to attempt to faithfully adapt the Bene Gesserit in their breeding program, as well as the new threat that has emerged from the scattering, in the form of the honored matres who weaponize sex as a means of control and enslavement. So while I'm optimistic about eventually getting a God Emperor adaptation, I'm less optimistic about seeing anything beyond it. Or at least nothing faithful to the source material, even though I would very much like to see it. On a positive note, one thing Hollywood won't be able to complain about in the later Dune books is how women-dominated they are. Although seeing what has been coming out lately, I wouldn't be surprised if the complaint becomes that the females in the books are too feminine. But at the very least, we won't have to worry about characters being gender swapped, because it's only a problem when there are too many men in a story. Whether or not a God Emperor of Dune adaptation will ever see the light of day is definitely up for debate. As long as the momentum and hype can stay high, there is certainly a chance. The film itself will undoubtedly be unforgettable, whether it be good or bad. I think that if they continue the Dune saga beyond Denis Dune 3, that they need to stop shying away from the weird and just fully commit to what Frank Herbert created. What do you think? Would God Emperor of Dune make for a good adaptation? Let me know in the comment section below. I will continue making Dune and other sci-fi fantasy content for the foreseeable future, so consider subscribing to the channel. Until next time.